In this episode of the Razorback screencast, we're going to look a little bit at the sort of hardware that holds some of the fairing in place, some of the armor plating, if you will. So looking underneath the machine, we can see that we do have some pieces of armor coming down the sides right here. Obviously they're not complete yet, and they're just sort of floating in the air. So that's the first thing I'd like to address. They need something to hold on to, and at the same time I don't really want to remove the cowling that's down here. I'm not really sure if it's covering up any shortcomings. Oftentimes when I create a model like this, you don't model every single element that could exist on the bike, because a lot of it just ends up getting covered up by fairings and whatnot. But let's take a peek behind here and see what there is. And it looks like there's some sloppy work on the exhaust that we can see, and it doesn't really look that much better without it, so I'd like to leave this in place. So what we're going to build is going to go on top of it. I think we should just start with a strip of polygons. That's what I like to start with oftentimes. And so we can just come down here from the side view and we can see what our armor looks like. Our pieces of armor, let me select this and then look for its parent. Okay, so these are our pieces of armor. So we're going to want a polygon strip that comes down here with the same number of segments and sort of follows this curve going down this to the front. And then I'm envisioning it sort of wrapping around the front, and then we'll just extrude it to give it some thickness. So let's start with that. So I think under mesh we can go to the create polygon tool, and as long as we don't have an existing polygon object selected, we can just start drawing. So let's say 1, 2, 3. It looks like we're in end gone mode right now, so that's good. 4, and let's say, okay, I can't see exactly where the armor plating is, but I know that it's one segment, and then one segment again. And then let's give 1, 2, 3 segments to come around the front. And then we just mirror those exact spacings. I'm not too worried about the vertical spacing of the strip, because I plan to tweak that as we go along. So you see we missed one of the vertices here, so I can just hit MA to get the add point tool, and then we can add a point there. So if we go to the perspective view and we pull this part out from the center, you can see it's just a strip of polygons. So that's a good starting point. The next thing we do is press UE to remove the n-gons. Go back to the side view and just try to clean things up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is leave the armor symmetry visible and then basically hide everything else. So we have our armor symmetry and our polygon object. Now I can just take my move tool and we can just tweak this. So I just want it to line up basically where the armor is, because that removes the chances that we're going to see things like say a polygonal object with 3 segments here that curves a little bit, and then we only have 2 segments to go, and we only have 2 segments that we can use to construct things, and you sort of end up seeing a gap. I don't want that. So what I did is I tried pretty hard to make sure that we have the same number of segments as the armor does. So there we go. One thing I will do, however, is try to smooth that out a little bit so we can see that it doesn't really follow a curve. So I'm just going to try to make sure that it does follow a curve, even if that means the armor hangs out from underneath a little bit. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better so far. Okay, great. Now, this seems like a good opportunity to use the symmetry object, but I think that when I was creating this bike, its actual body plating isn't really symmetrical. So I'm not sure how that would look. So in this case, I'm actually going to not use symmetry. We're going to just use some old school techniques to get this to look good. Now I know that I know that this armor plating is symmetry, so we can start off with symmetry if we wanted to, but I'd like to demonstrate some techniques, so we're still not going to. So what we do now is we just kind of go from underneath, and you know, again, this is just really manual work, so I would just come in here and move each point along the x-axis until it sort of intersects that spot right there. You can see we have to make some pretty drastic maneuvers right about now because the individual plates of armor don't line up perfectly. Okay, so now let's do the same thing with the lower bit. So I'm just going to move it in. There's really no trick that I can think of to doing this more quickly. Maybe you could use a spline and a loft. That might do it more quickly. I'm not certain about it though. Okay, so now we have our strip. Now if we go from the top view, we can sort of see what we've got here, and I'm just gonna again take some liberty to sort of smooth this out a little bit more, because I can always adjust the armor, but if this strip looks all bent, it's not gonna make a very good look. Okay, so I'm gonna bring this around to the front a little bit. Cool. So now we need to turn that that other object back on, the lower fairing that was in the front of the machine, because this geometry needs to play nicely with it as well. So we have our strip coming down the front that we're going to mount things to, and what we can do is unhide the other things, and so we can see right here that the way we have it doesn't work. We need to pull it out a little bit, maybe put it back like that, and we can twist the band a little bit so it flows a little bit more like the rest of our stuff is flowing. And what we can do is make sure that this stuff is nice and flowing, and then we can select this edge. Actually, let's leave that alone. So now we need to mirror it over to the other side. Now there is a mirror tool in Cinema 4D that works without the symmetry object. It's quite easy to use. You just have to select all your polygons, go to the top view in this case, and what we can do is use the mirror tool. I believe it's MK. No, it's MH maybe? Yes. So if you type MH, you get the mirror tool, and you can either use it in screen space like this, where you click and drag the symmetry line, or you can use it on world space, where you give it a plane. In this case I want YZ, so I give it YZ. You can tell it to weld points, make things symmetric, all these different options, and you can just sort of hit apply, and it mirrored it right over to the other side. So now we have mirrored polygons on the other side as well. We can then just take our bridge tool in edge mode, and we can just bridge because it's still one polygonal object. And then we can probably go from the top view, use our knife tool, and slice it right down the center. And then we can just move that forward a little bit, and we have the beginnings of our metal band that things are mounted to. So I'm going to hide the armor, because right now what I want to do is I want to make sure the band doesn't intersect badly. You see what I meant where this wasn't really symmetrical? I remember modeling it that the two sides are quite different, but in this case I think it looks okay. It looks good. The band is there, and it looks like it could be plausibly mounted to that area. If we wanted to give this a little bit of attitude, we could actually take this front point and push it down, give it sort of a knife edge, or sort of a like sort of something you'd see on the front of a train, just to give it a little bit of attitude. We can stretch that out, and then we can select these 4 points and pull them back a little bit. But we're getting into that area where we're just doing things for the look of it. I'm not certain that it looks good, but I'm gonna go with it anyway. This machine should look dangerous, so that's what I'm trying to do. So now that we have that, we can extrude it. So this is really simple. We just select all of the faces, and then we just use the extrude tool. So the keyboard shortcut for that is D, and let me try to get a good angle so you can see both sides of the object. If I just do an extrude like that, it kind of works, but let's see, create caps. We want create caps on. We also want this to be a plausible thickness. So I think 1/2 inch would be good. So 0.5, hit enter. And give it a very substantial look. And if create caps is off, you'd see we'd create a hollow object, but create caps is on from one of my last operations, so that'll do just fine. I can then go to the side view and clean up the front here because that extruded quite strangely. We just clean that up, and if we look around the machine now, it definitely looks a lot more substantial. It looks like that's a formidable piece of steel coming around the machine. Now, just to make it a little bit more realistic, what I like to do is get the edges on the sides here and just round them off a little bit. So I use MS to get my bevel tool, and we just bevel it a little bit just to give it that sort of chamfered look. Now we have this bar that runs around the base of the machine. Looks like it got a little bit twisted here just because of the angle of the extrude. The extrude tool needs to figure its stuff out. Typically when you extrude something, it just tries to find a happy medium. In this case it didn't work because it needed to come down a little bit more like this. But it was only doing the best it could with the limited amount of math that it had available to it. So, you know, we can come in here and tweak this all day, but at a certain point I'm gonna have to pull myself away from it and say that's good enough. And I think that point is right now. So we have that bar that's now going down around the machine. So we can now bring our armor plating back. And, you know, things like this help sell the overall effect. It looks now like it's just another bar down there, but the more components you insert into the machine that look like they have a purpose, they look like they're there by design, not just by chance, the more believable your machine is going to look. The Transformers movies do that really well. When you see one of those robots transform, there's so much stuff going on that it's gotta mean something. It can't just be because an artist decided it looked good. So I'm pretty sure the Transformers guys have a story of why there are so many moving parts when a Transformer transforms. And if they don't, well, I'd say they got lucky. Okay, so that's the rear armor plate. Now we can come a little bit forward with the medium armor plate. So what I'm doing is I'm not selecting just the 2 points down there. I'm selecting these points up here as well, because that way when I pull it out, it sort of keeps its angle and I don't need to do too much tweaking. And this part here is the part that you need to tweak after, instead of all 3 parts going down. So we can just tweak that. Looks good. And this part in the front, again, I'm going to select, oh, this is tricky. Okay, I'm going to select 2 rows. So the bottom row and then this row right here, even though it contains an extra point. And what we can do is we can just pull it out like we've been doing before. It still looks good. We've made the machine a little bit fatter, but that's okay. I don't think it matters at this point. And I think what we can do while we're in here, let's just make a tweak. I think this bit here can come out a little bit. No, it can't. It was like that because of the motor. So I think I'm gonna leave it like that. So alright, so now we have this bar down there, but you can still barely see it. And I think what we can do to make it a little bit more pronounced is a couple of things. We can move this edge up a little bit. Now I'm not too worried that this edge isn't in symmetry, because if there's an imperfection down there, it's only going to add to the realism. So what we can do is we do a loop selection, so UL for loop, or you can hold V and go to the select menu and just choose loop. And I want the outside, so click to select and I get all the way around the outside. And once I have that selected, I can use my bevel tool again. It's probably one of my favorite tools. So we can right click and say bevel. And then what I'd probably want to do is do a bevel, a convex bevel with one subdivision. And so we just click and drag. We get a convex bevel with one subdivision. And what this does is it gives it an edge. And it doesn't just give it a super sharp edge, it gives it an edge that actually has okay, so there's, just like in design, there's no such thing as pure black. I mean, in the world around us, you'd be hard pressed to find something that is 100% black, like 0000 in the RGB spectrum. It always has a color to it. So in art and design, you'll hardly ever find someone use pure black because it's just unrealistic. It's very hard to find pure black unless you're in a cave with all the lights out, at which point, what is there? The same thing goes for 3D. It's so hard to find something that is 100% sharp. Maybe a knife blade or something insane like that. So when you're creating an object in 3D, one of the things you can do to give it realism is to put a slight edge on it, a slight bevel, because it makes it believable. It makes it look like it's actually a weathered piece of steel or whatever it might be. So now that we have that edge, we can see you're still seeing the polygonal facets. And what we need to do is add a Phong tag. So Cinema 4D tags Phong. Set an angle limit of about 60 degrees. And that helps keep the front here nice and sharp. Although our same edge, the edge rant I just went on, applies to the front here as well. So if I hold V, hover over loop and release, I can select this loop right here. And then we can right click and get our bevel tool, and we can do the same thing right here to make it more believable. So we still have some funny smoothing there. I'm just going to select all and press UE to get rid of the n-gons. And if I go to point mode, we can select these points, and what we can do is just bring them down until the Phong shading kicks in and it gets sharp, because that's the look we want. So now we have this bar that comes down below the machine, and all it's really done is it's just given us something plausible to mount this armor to, because it wouldn't have looked like armor if we mounted it to the plastic fairing. So now we actually have something substantial to mount it to. And what I can do is I can just come in here and modify this object so that they sort of line up with it a little bit better. And then we can put some bolts in there. But I'm not going to put bolts in until we figure out what thickness it should be, because we're just going to have to move them. So I think that's it for now. We're just going to leave that part down there. I'm going to try to keep this one kind of short because we did a little bit of modeling, and modeling videos always tend to go long when you try to do more than one thing. So for this video, I'd say we're done. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I know it wasn't a very long screencast. Some of you guys are probably celebrating that fact. And until next time, See ya.